Hi, it's Valerie from VMCPA, here to talk to you today about the 3 ways to record sales and payments from customers in QuickBooks. I had a client reach out to me recently, and she asked a question that made me realize that it was really important for her to understand the difference between invoices, sales receipts, and deposits in QuickBooks. So rather than walk you through the clicks of creating any of these forms or walking through the deposit window or anything like that, I'd rather spend a little bit of time with you today comparing and contrasting the reasons why you might use an invoice over a sales receipt, or why you might use a sales receipt or over an invoice, or likewise, why you might use a deposit as opposed to an invoice or a sales receipt. So we'll walk through those today in the form of a chart, and I hope by the end you'll understand in your business or when you're advising your clients when it's best to use each one of these 3. Before we get started, a brief note about QuickBooks. You may have heard that QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online are very different. People seem to bear very strong opinions about which one is better than the other. But I'll tell you, when we're talking about invoices, sales receipts, and deposits, they function very similarly. So while I may show you some screenshots of one or the other, they basically function the same in over QuickBooks Desktop or QuickBooks Online. What varies mostly is the look and feel, which ultimately is not really the important thing. There are a couple of places where they differ, and when we get to those, I'll point them out to you. But otherwise, you can pretty much take everything that we're saying today as applicable in QuickBooks Online, QuickBooks Desktop. It's all the same. So with that, let's get started. So let's begin by comparing the time commitment or the level of detail, or maybe better said, the amount of clicks or the amount of input screens that you'll be using in QuickBooks for each of these 3 methods. So invoices are level 3, sales receipts level 2, deposits level 1. Really what that translates to is in invoicing, you could use up to 3 input screens. Sales receipts, you could use up to 2 input screens, and deposits, you'll definitely only be using 1 input screen. Now, let's just quickly show you what those forms look like in this sample QuickBooks file. Again, I am not going to walk you through how to fill out these forms. There's plenty of other videos out there for that. And maybe someday I'll make you a video to talk you through how to best utilize these forms, or how to set up things behind the scenes to really get the most out of these forms, these input screens. But for today, I'm just going to show them to you so you can just get a sense of the different forms and sort of how much input you'll be doing in QuickBooks depending on the different methods. So here we would start, if we were invoicing, of course, we would start by creating an invoice. And then we would receive payment against that invoice. And then depending on how we use this deposit to pull down menu, we would either just directly record the payment from the customer into the checking account, in which case you would only be using 2 forms, or you would record it into undeposited funds, which is kind of a holding account here in QuickBooks, so you can accumulate multiple payments from customers and then ultimately use the Make Deposits window to select all of those payments and batch them in a single deposit. So that's the 2 or possibly 3 steps on invoicing. If you were to do a sales receipt, then you would simply enter the sales receipt. That's step 1, or possibly all of the steps, depending again on how you use the deposit to pull down menu here. So either if it was a single payment from a customer, you would choose the company checking account because that matched the single deposit that you put in the actual bank account, or you would batch it together by using this holding account called undeposited funds, and then later you would use a second screen of Make Deposits to select the various deposits that you had accumulated in undeposited funds and batch together to match the actual amounts that you had deposited into your bank account. And then the third method, deposits, is actually this window here. You would use this window to record all of the information that you wanted to record about the payment from the customer. This window does allow you to record the name of the customer, the income account that you want to associate this payment with, and a few other details like a memo and a check number and so on, and of course the amount and the date. So if that is sufficient for you, then it's possible that you would only be using this window. So next, let's do a little compare and contrast with allowing your customer to pay you after the sale versus recording the sale and the payment from the customer all in one. So invoices are required if you allow your customer to pay you after the sale. So you would record the invoice, and then when your customer paid you, you would receive a payment against that invoice. Instead, if your customer pays you at the time of sale, then you would record a sales receipt, or sometimes a deposit window. Just typing in the details of the deposit into your bank account is sufficient. So let's just think through a couple of circumstances when you might use one over the other. So let's say you are a law firm and the staff in your firm accumulated time on a client's file over the month, and then you have your month-end billing, you accumulate that time on an invoice, you send that invoice to your customer, and depending on the terms that you've set up with your customer, they will have the payment due, say, upon receipt or in 15 days or 30 days or what have you, and then you'll receive payment from that customer against the invoice, and then you'll record the deposit of that payment into your checking account. So that is the full meal deal when it comes to invoicing, multi-step process. An example where you might use a sales receipt. Let's say you were a hairstylist and you had somebody come into your shop and you provided the service and they paid you right at that same time. There's no delay in the payment. In that case, you would record a sales receipt, and then that would allow you to include both the sale to the customer and the payment from the customer all in one form. And then, like I showed you earlier, you would either include in that same form the deposit of the money into the bank account all in one form, or you would separate those out if you'd batched multiple payments from multiple customers into one bank deposit. And then let's think of an example when you might just cut to the chase and skip an invoice, skip a sales receipt, and just record a deposit in QuickBooks. That might be, say you're a freelancer and you just did a one-off day gig for somebody and they just paid you at the end of the day. They're not an ongoing client. You don't need to collect a lot of information about that transaction. And so you could just take a shorthand and just record that, hey, I earned X dollars of this kind of income today, and I put it right in my bank account, or took a check image and deposited it through my mobile banking app, something like that. That would be a great example of when you might use a deposit. So continuing on, let's make a deposit in QuickBooks Online now, and we'll see where that deposit shows up. Remember, the point of bookkeeping is not just to dutifully punch in numbers, but we're here to put in the information so we can get the best information back out. So a deposit is really bare bones and doesn't land in a certain places. And when it doesn't land there, then we can't get the detailed information that will allow us to analyze and understand how our business is doing. So let's go to New Bank Deposit, and I'm just going to quickly enter a deposit here, and then we're going to look for it in certain locations and see whether it shows up there or not. So let's say we did a one-day job. I'm just typing in a little notation there, and we'll say it's $500. So just so we can look for this transaction again, let's just note that it's $500 and it was on the date of October 24th, and the customer was Pies Cakes. Cute little name there. Okay, so save and close. Now, let's look for it in the customer center. So if I go to sales and then customers, and then I search for Pies Cakes, do we see this transaction in the transaction list? No, we don't. We would only see in the transaction list sales receipts, invoices, refunds, things like that. Things where you've actually entered something into a transaction window in QuickBooks. What about in reports? So of course it's going to show up in your profit and loss statement because you indicated which income account it goes to. But what about your more detailed reports? Let's go to sales by customer summary here. And let's limit the report to the date we know that transaction happened. And we do not see anything by pies, cakes here. So a deposit does not land on a sales by customer summary report. What about income by customer? And let's again limit this to October 24th, and we'll look for pies, cakes. Ah, there it is. Okay, that doesn't surprise me, and that is because we indicated again which income account was related to this, but we didn't input it in a sales transaction window. So it appears on the income by customer summary, but not on the sales by customer summary. That's an important distinction. Let's buzz through these next few items on our list. So both invoices and sales receipts can have custom fields with additional information. You can get behind the scenes and create a user-defined field and then use it for virtually anything. For example, if you had a landscaping firm and you wanted to track which crew worked a particular job, you could have a crew number field. Next up, automating inventory. So inventory tracking actually is quite different in QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online, but fundamentally, if you want to track the sale of inventory, it must be done using an invoice or a sales receipt, and that is true in both versions of QuickBooks. Now we get to a few items that only invoices can help us with. If you want to know how much your customers owe you at any given time, you have to use invoices. When you use invoices, it gives rise to a few important and valuable reports, such as the open invoices report or the customer balance summary or the customer balance detail reports. Only invoices allow you to send reminders to your customers requesting payment. Automated reminders can be done in QuickBooks 2020 or later and in QuickBooks Online. Only invoicing allows you to track how long it takes for your customers to pay you. There is a report called Accounts Receivable Aging Detail and Accounts Receivable Aging Summary that is only available if you have invoices. Furthermore, only invoicing can add late payment charges. So you can't add a late payment charge to a sales receipt or a deposit unless you do it manually behind the scenes. That is to say, and when I say behind the scenes, I mean outside of QuickBooks, and you do the math and then you add it. But in invoices, you can add late payment charges and quite easily. If you want to offer terms, that is discounts for early payments, you can do that only with invoicing. In QuickBooks Desktop, it is done more or less automatically if you kind of know where to click. In QuickBooks Online, it is not done automatically. The only way you would know that the discount was allowed is if you paid attention to the dates and you had your customer pay you less than the total amount, then you would know to give a discount at that time. You can create estimates that can be turned into invoices once a sale is made. That can only be done using the invoice process. So you would create an estimate, or sometimes we call it a quote. You would turn that quote or estimate into an invoice and then proceed along the accounts receivable cycle. But that cannot be done with sales receipts or deposits. The next two items can only be done with invoices in QuickBooks Online and can be done with invoices and sales receipts in QuickBooks Desktop. So you can accumulate what we call non-posting transactions, sort of transactions in waiting. Those could be time accumulated on behalf of a client or customer project. It could also be money spent on behalf of the client. So in either case, you can accumulate those in QuickBooks and then pull them onto an invoice when it's time to actually bill the customer. You can accumulate those charges and pull them onto a sales receipt if you're in QuickBooks Desktop, but if you're in QuickBooks Online, you cannot put them on a sales receipt. If you're in QuickBooks Online, you would have to create an invoice with those delayed charges or that accumulated time. And last but not least, if you want to send a transaction receipt to your customer, you have to send an invoice or a sales receipt. there is no mechanism for sending a copy of a deposit to a customer in QuickBooks. So I said it before and I'm going to say it again. The object of bookkeeping is not to just punch in a bunch of numbers just because you're supposed to. The idea is to put in the information so that you can get it back out in a useful way. Yes, maybe that's for preparing a tax return, but it's also for you to see the reports about how long it takes for your customers to pay you, and how much your customers owe you, and what's happening with your inventory, and what kind of sales did you do this month. Those can only be done with invoicing. So I invite you to take a moment to ask yourself, what are your business information needs? Bare bones? Well, then you could use the deposit window. If you need a little bit more information, sales receipts are your friend. And if you need the full meal deal, invoicing is what you're up to. I hope this has been helpful. Please let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. I'm curious to know which forms you'll be using in the future. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.